Welcome to Creators Corner, a chance for us to spotlight creators, their decks, and other divination tools. Today, we're speaking with Oracle and Tarot deck creator, the marvelous, fabulous artist, and magic maker, Chris Ann. Chris Ann is also a marketing strategist and kickstarted 3 of her own independent decks, including the Sacred Creators Oracle, the Light Seers Tarot, my favorite, the Muse Tarot, and her latest deck, the Tarot of Curious Creatures, was just recently published by Hay House. So we are colleagues under the Hay House roster. Welcome, Chris Ann. I'm so glad to meet you finally.
Same. We've been wanting to do this for so long. It's nice to get, it's nice to get together finally.
I know. We've been texting up a storm, and I have to tell you, your decks are so fabulous. I remember, actually, I first noticed you on the Kickstarter. I was always curious to see, like, well, who's creating decks and why are they creating decks, etc. And I remember being really struck by the uniqueness of your art. I happen to love your art. I happen to love the way you look, etc. So I was very attracted to it. But you also have a really intelligent way in which you actually put the content with the art. So the whole shamil is fabulous as far as I'm concerned. So
thank you.
You are so welcome. So I want to go back to the beginning. I know, we have roots in divination. These are divination tools. When did you first get into divination? Do you remember when it first started being your calling, or just what made you interested in it?
Absolutely. I was 15 or maybe turning 16. I don't remember. I'm so not fantastic with time. I was either turning 15 or 16.
Yeah.
I was in Nova Scotia for the summer. My mom grew up in Nova Scotia on Cape Breton Island, and I was staying in my aunt's room. She was off. She was in Toronto. I was in Nova Scotia, lived in her room for the summer, and she had all of these fantastic books, like this beautiful bookshelf of all sorts of Celtic things and fairies and elves, and she had this book of runes. And at the time, I was sure, because all of the stuff that I saw was all Celtic. I thought runes were Celtic, because they were on my aunt's shelf. And I pulled out that book of runes, and it was the one, I think it was
Ralph Blum.
Yeah, exactly.
Ralph Blum.
Book of Runes in the 80s. Yep.
Yeah.
And I pulled that out and just kind of felt an instant connection to them, felt really sort of fascinated by the way those little clay tiles were clicking together. And by the end of the summer, I had gone down to the beach in Inverness and found, pretty uniform rocks, beach stones or pebbles right from the ocean, and made my own set. And yeah, that was really the very first tool that I really fell deeply into. I just fell into this sort of, the way it is, you kind of fall into, it's not love, but it's like this passion. It's this is a part of now how I experience my world, right?
Yeah. You aren't far off, though. Ralph Blum particularly did his runes based on the Nordic system, but there is the Celtic Olgum. So there is, the runes are not just in the Nordic culture, they are Celtic. So you weren't off. It was just the particular ones that you saw that you have, his were Norse.
Exactly.
But there are runic alphabets and divination tools in so many cultures. But I was in love with that set, the rune set too. I had that very same set. I bought it in the 80s, same thing. I loved it too. And I found runes were so magical, so magical. And tarot was hard. It was deeper. So tell me about your tarot journey when you got into the tarot.
It took me, it was probably about a year later when I happened upon a used Rider-Waite-Smith guidebook in a used bookstore. And it was, there was no deck with it. It was just the guidebook. And it was this old paperback from probably the 70s. And it was all written all in the margins and highlighted. Like there was probably more information written in it than actually was in the published book, And I bought the book. I didn't have any cards. I found it absolutely fascinating. I started reading the guidebook, and then I actually wasn't allowed to have tarot cards in my house when I grew up. And, but I had that guidebook, and I photocopied that guidebook in my high school library and made myself some paper cards.
I love this.
That was my first actual, like, I can pull a card or a piece of paper.
Right. And you knew what it was. Was it the Alfred Douglas book, or do you remember the name of the author?
I
who
don't. I
who wrote
really
it?
wish that I
Yeah.
still had it. I lost it years and years ago, or I don't even remember giving it away. It just kind of vanished from my awareness at some point, going back to an old bookshelf in my parents' house trying to look for it, and it's no longer there. So I don't really know what happened to it. I really wish that I still had it. I think it would be really, I imagine that whoever the the donor of that book was to the
Right.
used bookstore, I imagine that their perspective on tarot really shaped my own. And I
Of
wish that
course.
I could look at that now, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, there's so many nuances around the tarot, right? I mean, it started as a very medieval patriarchal system. And then there's so much nuance now. Well, we're certainly at a place where we can evolve it, right? And you've done that in your decks, right? So tell me a little bit about how you evolved your understanding of the tarot, because your tarot decks are popular, they're phenomenal, they're beautiful, and they are different. You know, they aren't exactly traditional. So how did you evolve your version of this?
One of the things that I knew, the first tarot deck that I created or that I started creating was the Light Seers. And one of the things I knew right from the beginning, like right from the get-go, I knew that I wanted a deck that was healing. So I had this kind of mantra on replay: let it be healing, let it be healing, let it be healing. And I also knew that, you know, every single reader that I know, when they're reading for someone and they pull the Tower or specifically the Death card, they pull that Death
Right.
card out. There's always that moment of, and the querent or the client is, you know, they have this like look of horror on their face, and every single reader's like, well, it's not literal, you know? So I wanted a deck that would express that same sentiment of, this is not the literal thing, and we don't need to be afraid of it, and we can have a deck that conveys, you know, both the shadow and the light, but that isn't necessarily scary, you know. And I know that you are, you know, you have that very same, you know, the good tarot also has that
Yeah.
that vibe, right?
Yeah, which is why I love your stuff. What I loved about what you did with the Light Seers Tarot was you didn't shy away. You gave a softer, compassionate, psychological perspective on the traditional cards, right? So exactly like I did with a good tarot, but yours was very masterful because it didn't shy away from the shadow, but it brought the light as the choice. You know, if we see this as an illuminated transition, for example, or transcendence, like the Death card. I know the Death, the Tower, the Five of Swords, Nine of Swords, Ten of Swords, right? Like you're like, oh my God, all the swords, and upside down cards, would freak people out. That's why I did the same thing. It was like, oh my God, we got to do something about these.
Yes.
and yours was so beautifully done. I loved it. You also do oracle decks. Tell me a little bit about your transition from the tarot to oracles and what made you want to do those too.
Well, my Sacred Creators Oracle was actually the first deck that I did as an indie creator. And that deck had such a it had to be an oracle deck because it had such a specific purpose. Mm-hmm. You know, it was for creators, it was for entrepreneurs, it was to help people sort of build their passion, build their business. And so I couldn't really figure out how to make everything that I wanted to put into that deck fit into the system of tarot.
Right.
But when it comes to actually, my passion as a reader, or, if I'm going to pull a deck if I'm going to read for myself or read for someone else, I will 90% of the time go for a tarot deck, just because once you have those meanings under your belt and you understand how the cards work, I just find it easier to work with. But I have no idea where I'm headed next. I almost feel like there may be an oracle deck in the future versus a tarot deck. After doing 3 tarot decks, I feel like I almost felt in the last one that you get to a point where I have a perspective on tarot and the images can be different, but I almost felt like, am I plagiarizing myself?
No, what? This is an interesting conversation because it's a fixed system, right? So tarot is a fixed system. So yes. The lexicon is fixed. It's always going to be 78 cards that are always going to have similar meanings. So I get what you meant. Like, how many can we actually make? So I've I understand this, because the lexicon is fixed. It's like it's always going to have this. The vocabulary is fixed. So I've found your decks all to be different enough, and they work well together too, because I'm a deck fanatic, right? So I'm like, oh my God, Chris Ann's decks work together. I love this. So, but I get it. It's that sense of what else can we say? Like how many more versions of this? Because really the art will differentiate more than the meanings will. So, but I think your first tarot deck, the Light Seer, that was the one that really set the tone, the compassionate tone for your work. So that's cool that you're going to do an oracle. I'm dying to find out what it's going to be like. So let's go back to the oracle, because as you know, oracles vocabulary, the lexicon for an oracle is very different. Did you set up to create the system, or did you kind of just channel it based on what you felt were the subjects, right? Because we know that it has to speak together. There has to be a vocabulary that's sacred. How did you do yours?
That's interesting. I think with the oracle deck, thinking back, it was very much channeled card to card in the beginning. The beginning was just sort of a free-for-all. This is coming and I'm just flowing with it, and here we go. But then when I got closer to the end, I felt the need to begin to look at it almost from a tarot perspective. Mm-hmm. And I ended up adding in 4 cards that were the 4, like one for each of the elements, feeling like I needed to make sure that all 4 suits were represented. Right. And then I started to, in Sacred Creators Oracle, actually the first 22 cards do align with the majors, but that wasn't, I didn't set out to do that. I just found that in trying to do something that was robust, you end up with all of those major energies in most decks anyways. I think they do show up in many different ways. I don't know if you feel the same, but I'll be reading with an oracle deck and a card. Well, this feels like the tarot or the tower, even though it's not the tower, or something like that. Right.
I did in the beginning, but I've done like 14 or 15 oracle decks since then. So now, because don't forget too, every oracle deck has to come, at least I think so. This is just my opinion. And mine came from a kind of a mishmash of runes, the I Ching, and tarot. So all 3 systems mushed together what I felt had commonality and universality amongst the 3 systems, then became a kind of a jumping off point for me with creating the oracles. And I do find oracles so much more robust for me to create, because they're their own little universes. And I know you feel the same way, that you're they're alive, right?
Yes. Yeah. They have they have their own sort of voice and their own direction, and they're so free to express whatever they want within their own system, or within whatever the theme is, or the tone, or whatever whatever their destination is. They're just so much freer than a tarot deck in so many ways. We have so much creative license when we're creating oracle decks.
Right? I think so too. Yeah. I think so too. I know I shared with you some of my art I was so nervous, like, want to see my painting?
Beautiful. They're so cool, right? There's something so special about being able to do the art, and it's just, there's just a rawness to it when it's your own meaning. Yeah, I'm so excited for you. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. So let's go back to your art, because your art really does differentiate your decks from anybody else's decks. So I love this latest one, the Curious Creatures. It's so fabulous. So now, do you do mostly digital? Is it some, because it's really unique. You have such a cool style. Tell me a little bit about how you get your images and where you start with them.
So I am by trade a graphic designer. So I've been working in graphics and branding and design for a very long time. So it's really just a culmination of all of that, all of those years of design practice. I consider myself a designer more than I do an artist, because it's mostly I mostly work in the digital realm. I pull a lot of, the Curious Creatures in particular, all of those animals and bodies are all images, and they're all stock photos that are kind of just really worked in Photoshop. And then there's the layers of digital hand shadowing and everything else put on top of it. So there's drawing and
Well, that's art.
It's a blend. It is.
Yeah,
I mean, it is totally
art.
art.
Come on.
Yes, it is.
Own
But I
it,
think
girl.
just because,
Own it.
yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably a part of just having studied design and gone through and been a designer my whole entire career, that's just still the way I see myself, you know?
Do you actually still work as a designer outside of creating the decks? So what is your main gig?
Rarely.
Yes?
Oh, very rarely. No, but very rarely. Like we take on maybe 2 projects a year, just because I've gotten so busy with everything else. And they have to be either clients that are 100% aligned or friends or old clients that have come back that, you know, that are just needing a little bit of a tweak here or there. But I transitioned my business in 2013.
Oh, wow.
I started transitioning my business. So
to strictly doing decks.
Yes.
Oh, that's so great. Are you going to be doing any classes on them at all? Or are you planning on teaching, or it's just a creative, not to say just, because I happen to know it takes a lot of work. There's no just happening here. But are you segueing it all into teaching or doing something like that? Or
yeah, so I actually am. I have been teaching online, but not in the like how to do tarot or not.
Yeah.
I don't teach in that area. I have a course that we're running right now that's called Branding and Magic. And so it sort of puts some of the branding and design stuff with spiritual entrepreneurs and creative entrepreneurs and people who are wanting to bring a little bit of both into their business.
Very cool.
So we do, you know, there's meditations, there's guided visualizations. We figure out our target client through some meditative stuff. It's just like using all of the typical tried, tested, and true branding stuff, but really bringing in mindset stuff. We have a little bit of, you know, intention setting and planning, but then we do that through sigil magic. So we do sort of this really cool blend of stuff that the courses, I mean, I've been running it for 6 or 7 years, a couple of times a year. And I love it. You know, it's one of the things that I'm proud of because it really brings a lot of different pieces of what I've done in the past into one course.
I love that you use sigil magic in this. I use sigil magic in my Dream Quest Mastermind. I have a small group coaching thing that I do for 8 months a year with a very small group of people. So, and we do sigil work, etc. And I love it. It's profound. So this is so cool. I had no idea that you had this class. What's it called?
Branding and Magic.
Branding and Magic. Wow, I love it.
When I started it, there wasn't as much on the market as there is now. Like there's now, when I first started doing that, it was very strange to include any sort of magic or cards in business.
Yeah.
And so I had to be very overt or people would not understand what I was doing.
Right.
And
come right out and spit it out.
Right. I had to.
Good girl. You're a girl after my own heart. Yes.
But now it's actually become kind of par for the course for a lot of business, which is fantastic, right? Like we were hoping we would get here, and here we are, you know?
I know. It was funny because when we decided to create this podcast at the corner of Fringe and Maine, it would bring up in me, you know, how so long I didn't want to tell people what I did for a living, right? For the longest time. I remember before I met my husband, when I would date somebody, I would literally realize I had to tell them what I did in case they had a big prejudice against it. And I remember dating one guy and then he was like, "Oh, I don't believe in that." I'm like, "Well, I can't date you anymore." He goes, "Why not?" And I'm like, because this is so out of alignment. And then I can't bring you home to my parents. Like, okay, well, that's over. And then I actually remember when I met my husband too, I was like, I looked at him, I said, "I need to tell you something." And he thought I was going to tell him something like I was a bank robber or something. I said, I looked so serious because my first date with him, I thought, I'm just going to get this over with and tell him what I did for a living because it was a big deal. And he was so perfect. He goes, "Oh, that's so cool." And I went, "Okay." Right. Because you're in. Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to the Muse Tarot. I love the Muse Tarot. So tell me a little bit about why you chose some of, because it reminded me a tiny bit of Art Deco, but not really. Does that make sense? Was I off on that?
Yes. Yeah. It is a little bit, it has its own style, doesn't it? It's very, that deck, I have such a soft spot in my heart for that deck, because so there's a story here. When I was creating Light Seers, I was probably about half of the way through.
Yeah.
You know, when you're creating a deck, you're into a really big project, you know, the art, the time, the energy. And then out of the blue, the Muse deck showed up in my mind. It started showing up in my art. I'm like, this is a different deck. And I was really resisting it because I have that, you know, entrepreneur mind. We must finish what we started. We're not going to get anywhere. So I was just pushing it away for months, and it would not go away. And the Light Seers was I was so thoughtful in the Light Seers. Like there was a lot of, it was very, you know, there was a lot of thinking and choices and how do I work this concept in a new way? And the Muse was the antidote to that. The Muse was whatever shows up, this is what it is. It's even if I'm not even sure these colors go together, this is the way it is. Like, she just showed up with such a bold energy,
like a flourish.
And it was like wild and fast. And I had chosen, it's funny enough, the year prior, you know, I had chosen my word of the year was inspired. And then the word of the next year, when the Muse showed up, was mused. I said, I just kind of made up this word. Like, I want to feel mused, like run through by the Muse, you know, use me.
Right.
And she did.
Well, they feel
but
so
it was
different.
Yeah.
Right.
And it was intense. Yeah. No, it's okay. It was totally intense and different and wild, you know?
That's one of the things that I find so interesting about your decks is the way they temperamentally feel. Like the Light Seers is a very thoughtful deck. When you use it, or when I've used it, I've used it as a second opinion deck. So I'll use my decks, and then I'll say, you know what, I'm gonna use this one and see what it says. And because your guidebooks are written very distinctly, which I love, because they're like you create them as if they are their own beings, which is beautiful. It had a very like, think about this, and you know, let me lead you through that. And there's a gentle quality, whereas Muse is like, whoopee! Like, yeah, let's do this. It feels like we're going dancing with this one. And and very in your face, like, but in a beautiful way, not in a like in your face in a negative, like a challenge. It wasn't challenging at all. It was very like, let's come and dance with me and play with me and make you think. It was cool.
Thank you. Yeah, there was that sort of inspired energy, but I'll be honest with you, from this side of the workstation, it felt a little bit, it was too much. It felt
out of control.
Almost out of control. And almost manic in a way, you know, this like burst of energy where I was so in it. I didn't want to put my pen down, my computer down. It was just, I was engrossed in this. And it was very beautiful, but I don't know if I'll ever feel that mused or that inspired again, because you can't live in that state.
No,
that state was just over the top. Like,
I felt that way a little bit. The deck that's coming out next is the Dreamweaver's Oracle that I'm working with a phenomenal artist. He's a Japanese-American artist named Joel Nakamura. And I've worked with one of my dearest friends for 14 decks, Jenna, who's a digital artist like you. And we worked very closely together. You know, I had hired her in the beginning years and years and years ago. And then we ended up to be best of friends. And the transition from the digital, but in my mind, it was like I was forced. I had to go find this very specific thing. And when it takes over you, it's like, and now like, but wait, my little comfort zone, wait a moment. And then it just changed everything. It changed the direction. So I get what you mean by feeling taken over and like, whoa, I don't know if I can go through that again. Yes. You say this a lot, which is personified inspiration. Tell me what that means when you use that term.
Well, I feel like inspiration, and I'm trying to remember. I'm like, do I say that a lot?
You do.
I probably do. You know, I get this sense that when I think about inspiration or muse energy, and this is, I think, just coming from that sensation of the muse as being a thing, an energy, but
Yeah.
it's also kind of shows up in the way we feel, the way we run inspiration through our systems, and the actions we take and the things we create or the lives we create because of it.
Yeah.
But we also have this sort of muse energy that shows up in other people. You know, they show up in our lives and they inspire us. And sometimes I've had so many moments in my life where people have been catalysts, and not because I want to do what they're doing necessarily, but and sometimes it's even a rub, right? Like, how are they doing that? How are they making that work? How is this person making a living on inspiration? I remember that was a big one for me. I thought that's not a career. Or, you know, like just these sorts of moments in our lives where other people who are so very unique, doing their own thing, that they have this sort of personification of the muse energy here on earth that just sets a seed and then poof, it lights someone else up. You know, I think we all have that energy or the potential for that energy when we're just walking in our truest, I don't know if it's our essence or in our inspiration, but when someone else is inspired, that's going to inspire everyone else in the room, sort of thing, you know?
Yeah. You know who did that for me was Marianne Williamson.
Yes.
Back in the 80s when her book A Return to Love first came out, and I had just been getting into A Course in Miracles. I had just gotten sober because I got clean and sober in 1986. And so I was totally into everything and, you know, snorting it all. And there's her book. And I was so inspired by her because she had been a singer. I had been a singer. And there were all these things, but it was like, oh, wow. You can make a living talking about this? You know, is this possible? And then at the same time, there were the runes, and then there was this bookstore in Toronto, the Omega Center, and I was in there and just like amazed by everything. And when we see what is possible, I think that's that personification of inspiration. It's like, oh, it's there. So it's not about, we have to be very careful not to compare ourselves to it. Rather, allow ourselves to tune into that inspired energy so that we do our own version of that, right? It's not the same. Yeah. I think sometimes too that when we look at creating decks, the decks, because I'm an animist, right? So when I create a deck, the deck teaches me what it is. Like the deck becomes the personification of the inspiration and talks to me. This is who I am. This is how I want to look. This is what you have to do for me. It's one of the reasons I changed my direction with art. It's just because it was just time. The decks were saying to me, no, we want to go over here. And so there's that too, that there's a catalyst that is through us, but we give birth to it, but it's its own thing.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
I know you feel that because of the way your decks feel. There's no way you couldn't have.
Yeah, and I had that with the Tarot of Curious Creatures. I thought that it was, it is kind of quirky and fun and playful, but partway through the process, it had its own mind, especially in the guidebook portion of it. It was very, I didn't expect some of the messages that came. They were even a little more direct than the other decks, from this like fun, playful, sort of quirky, eclectic looking thing to have like very direct messages, and even messages about the environment. Well, of course, in messages from the environment, we're gonna show up, right? From maybe the polar bear, but I didn't realize that going in.
No, isn't that cool though? When it teaches you. So how long does it take you to create a deck? For me, it's about 9 months. So what about you?
Yeah. Probably start to finish. Part of me is like, it only takes a year. And then it's like, but remember all of those edits and all of those changes and all of that prep stuff. So no, it's probably closer to 18 months, to be honest with you.
Wow. Yeah, you know what? You're right. Because I never include the editing part. For me, it's just the inception of the idea to the end of the guide, because for me, I'm the writer, I'm the creative. Visuals in the past, I've worked directly with the artist and said, this is what I want, this is what I need. With Joel, it was completely different. He just sent me sketches. I tell him, this is what it means mystically. Tell me what you think that means artistically. And they would send it to me and I'd be like, oh my God, this is so weird. I love it. Because I wanted something cosmic and weird. But you're right. It does take a long time. That's wild. Okay. And are you working on any new decks right now?
No, I've started more than one. I'm in a really interesting place with my creativity. After having done so much output and very quickly,
Yeah.
I felt super drained. I did hit, it was actually late 2019, I had hit actual like mental burnout, like legitimate
Right.
burnout. And, coming back from that and then working through the Tarot of Curious Creatures, I did it at a slower pace, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
But right now, I just felt like the world is in so much upheaval and chaos, and I'm not, there's a lot of people that are able to ground into their creativity in this moment, and that's what's grounding them. And I in a way, I really wish that was me.
But
But it's
sometimes
not.
we need a break, right?
Yes.
Sometimes,
Yeah.
and I like that you said that, because that makes me feel better. And you were saying, I've started a few things and then dropped it because I felt for a stretch there too that I just couldn't. I wanted to hide underneath a blanket. And then I started painting for me. And then it turned out I was painting something that looked like oracle cards. And it was like, oh, wow, and then it happened. But I get it. When you need a break, you need a break, and you need to honor that creativity break. When you have that fallow, it's like when the farmer, we live on a farm. So it's like the idea that the land has to lie fallow in order to get that creative juice back again. So before you go, I would love to pull a card with you from one of your decks. And why don't we just pull a card about what does the world need to know?
Yeah, I got a copy of Light Seers. There we go.
Excellent. Let's pull one card from your beautiful deck. This was fun.
It was Eight of Pentacles.
Oh, well, isn't that true? Isn't
Totally
that
not
just
the card
true?
I was expecting, but yeah.
So tell me what you see for the Eight of Pentacles, and I'll add my little 2 cents.
Absolutely. So it's funny, the Eight of Pentacles right now, for me, it tends to mean like kind of like this quick energy, doing lots of work, like really honing your craft, getting really true to the best version of whatever it is that you're doing. But the message that I'm hearing right now has a lot more to do with sort of honing into our focus,
Yeah.
and it's not necessarily the craft, but really paying attention to where our awareness and our focus is. And that's what's really going to get us through, like there's so much going on that we can almost get whipped away in the eye of a tornado if we're not careful with our energy. But if we really just, stay in our lane, be aware of what's going on, but also be really hyper aware of where our attention and our focus is and where our energy is going, that's going to help us.
Oh, I love that. I love that little twist on that. So I've always seen the Eight of Pentacles as the card of the apprentice, right? So that we're still needing to be in beginner mind and the craft of being good humans, good people, that we're still in the apprentice stage. We're not masters of anything right now. And the fact that it's pentacles is the material, but if we need to focus the spiritual into the material, and we still are new at it. So the craft of life, right? We're still the apprentice. We have a lot to learn, right? And I think that's brought that in too. And I love what you said about focusing, like focus the energy. We need to know that for sure. Well,
yes.
Thank you. That was very meaningful. So everybody, thank you for listening to this fantastic conversation between me and Chris Ann. And you and I will continue this over coffee some other time. For more information about Chris Ann, her fabulous decks, and the other work that she does, you can find her at chrisann.com. And I'm going to spell that to you. Chris Ann is spelled CHRIS-ANNE.com. Thank you so much, Chris Ann.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
If this episode resonated with you because you're a creative visionary, artist, or entrepreneur, and you'd like to hear more episodes like this, well, let us know. You can email us at podcast@ColetteBaron-Reid.com, or you can always drop a comment on any of my social channels. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Basically, I am everywhere. So thank you so much for joining us today on Inside the Wooniverse. Until next time, I'm Colette Baron-Reid. Be well.